Hello and welcome to Bites, Bread, and Barbecue. My name is Ross Quintino. Today we're going to discuss a little bit about lightweight Linux environments. These are generally desktop environments that are used to revitalize older hardware and make it run like newer computers. I have done videos in the past on how to install some of these and how to make a computer run faster. I think that some of those videos are almost 2 years old, but today what we're going to do is we're going to compare LXQt and XFCE. And I'm going to try to do a little bit of head-to-head benchmarking with these two lightweight environments, each of which would likely improve your performance on your computer. So let's start off with a little bit of information on what they are. Here we have an introduction here for Bites, Bread, Barbecue and what I'm going to be doing today, which is comparing LXQt to XFCE. And of course, I have my site logo over here. We're going to be comparing these two lightweight environments that are typically used to take older computers and make them run faster. GNOME is what I'm going to be using for my baseline, however. GNOME is the most common Linux desktop environment that is used in the US. It is very polished. It does take up a little bit more memory, but it is a very smooth, very common desktop environment. And what I want to do is show a little graph that shows how much the lightweights do get used. Worldwide Linux desktops, the number one used is KDE, most commonly used in Europe, but it is the most common worldwide as well. GNOME is the most common in the US. KDE has 25% of the market, GNOME has 20%. Our friend XFCE that we're going to be testing today does have 15% of the market. Next comes Cinnamon. Cinnamon is the flagship environment for Linux Mint, which is very popular because it is very similar in its execution and appearance to Microsoft Windows, which is an easy transition Linux for people to use. I actually use it as my daily driver, and I tend to be a distro hopper, and I've used them many different Linux distributions, but I do keep coming back to Mint and find Cinnamon to be very comfortable. Mate is basically GNOME 3. It is continued to be supported, but it is structured like the old GNOME 3 environment. Next comes LXQt with 5% of the market. I'm not familiar with Enlightenment or i3WM. I've never used those. And you can see that 12% of the Linux are a generic other. What I've done is I've gone ahead and made 3 virtual machines, all with the same parameters. I'm going to use GNOME as a baseline, which is a typical environment and the amount of memory it would use. I've then made virtual machines with the same parameters for LXQt and also XFCE. Each machine has 8.129 gigabytes of RAM. It has a hard drive of 25 gigabytes. Each has 5 CPUs, which is what my aging machine would allow. They're each created in VirtualBox on a Linux Mint environment. All are tested with EndeavourOS that is running a 6.12.7 kernel. Endeavour runs an Arch-based Linux, so I wanted to have the same Linux running under the desktop environment so that there would be a fair comparison. The environments were tested, as I said, with GNOME, LXQt, and XFCE. So let's take a look at GNOME Linux running on this Endeavour environment. GNOME is a very clean interface. You have this button up here in the corner. You can also use the Windows key on the keyboard, but when you press that, it takes you to a bar that would look similar to what you would see on something like a Macintosh. And if you hit these 9 buttons here, it brings up every single thing that Endeavour installed. Now this is a clean install that I've done to a virtual machine. It did detect my HP printer, but this is all that installed. Interestingly, it does not install an Office suite by default. It does give you the option for extensions, and it also gives you GNOME tweaks. These are all things that are used to enhance your GNOME environment. When you look at this, it looks very professional, and you can see that when I opened that window, there are nice curved edges. It is very pleasing to the eye. It looks like a very sophisticated, very polished environment to work through. But let's take a little look here. Let's look at our system and what we have installed here. This should give us an about window. Well, perhaps it didn't take, oh no, it's working. you can see that, there we go. You could see how long that took. And GNOME is a bit of a memory hog. And this shows you here that I have the 8 gigabytes that we described earlier and a 25 gigabyte system. And if I click on system details, you can see that I'm running on an Intel i7. You can see that this is a rolling release with EndeavourOS, basically because it's based on Arch, so it will be a rolling release. It is using X11 instead of Wayward, and you can see here it is listing, in fact, the Linux kernel 6.12.7 Arch-based system. So this tells us a little bit here about how this system is running. Let's take a look again, though, at just opening a simple window like Firefox. How long is that going to take us? So if we boot up Firefox here, and I'll have to make some idle chat, you can see in this virtual machine it did take a little bit of time for that to actually come up. Let's pick on something here. I don't know anything about this foot image here, but it looks like it has some graphics. How long will it take it to render these inside of my virtual machine? And you can see that really did not pop too quickly. But looking at the aesthetics, again, nice curved windows here, a little bit of a drop shadow. It gives you a very nice appearance of what is going on with each window that's launched in GNOME. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of benchmarking here, things that we're going to compare. From the terminal, I'm very first going to run neofetch. And this is going to tell us a little bit about our system here. Again, the EndeavourOS is running with the particular kernel we have. 898 packages that are running. We are running GNOME 47, and I did completely update this system before making this video. So this is current to what you would get with Endeavour. And you'll see that it's running 904 megabytes in this particular instance. Now, every time is a little bit different, and later I'm going to have a slide comparing the different benchmarks. They each are a little bit different, but 908, this does show that it's a little bit more memory intensive than the other environments we're going to test today. That's why I wanted this as a baseline. So let's clear that out. Let's look at System Bench. This is a benchmarking program to tell you different statistics for the system you're running. And we're going to test the CPU here. What this is going to do is just a single thread, and it's going to tell us the minimum and maximum time that it takes to pull this CPU and the number of events it can occur. So the total time here was 10 seconds roughly, and in that time it did 12,585 events. Sounds like a lot, but we'll see what the other environments can do. You can also see that the minimum here was 0.5 milliseconds. The maximum was 2.54 milliseconds that were present to achieve these different events. So let's clear that out. Now let's take a look at our memory on this computer, and it's going to take a few seconds longer because what it's doing is it's actually pulling the memory to see how many events can be executed into the memory in this time. We can see that it has done 51,582,900 events in a total of 10 seconds. You can see that the minimum was 0 and the maximum is 0.75 milliseconds. So it doesn't sound too bad, but we'll see how the other ones compare. Lastly, let's take a look at HTOP just to get a general idea. And again, it's reflecting. Now here, it's telling us that we're only using 700 megabytes of our memory. I don't know what has changed. I haven't really loaded or unloaded anything, but neofetch was reporting 900 megabytes. This is only reporting 702 with an average load time. It varies a little bit here, but it stays right about 0.45. And it tells you a list of every one of the different things that's being done by your computer at this point in time. So that gives us a little bit of information on a very polished environment known as GNOME. Even when we go to shut down, here you'll see these windows are very nice and curved. They look very professional. And when we go to do power off, everything on this computer does look very smooth and very professional. And that's why it is very popular in its appearance and ease of use. Moving on to LXQt, we can see that this environment looks a lot different from our GNOME environment. If you recall, the GNOME had one little button up here in the corner that launched into a icon-based launching pad with a bottom bar that was sort of reminiscent of Apple computers. With LXQt, we're very lightweight here. We do have a little bird down here in the bottom. If we push that, it gives us a menu, and you can see that that executed rather quickly. And as we scroll through our menu, it's kind of like a reverse of the Windows menu. We can see the graphics programs that it is installed. And once again, this is an EndeavourOS running a 6.12.7 Arch-based kernel. So this should be the exact same Linux, just with a different desktop environment, and we're going to judge the speed. We have Firefox here. We have a little bit of programming, a little bit of sound and video programs that's installed, some system tools, and some preferences that you can set here. And then if you want to shut down or leave or whatever. It also gives you tabs here at the bottom for each of the desktops that are available. It installs 4 by default. You have links to the terminal, file system, and Firefox, and we can even bring up the configurations here for appearance and everything that is available on your computer right from the main menu. And you can see that a lot of this is very much similar to the different things that were available to us on GNOME. But if you notice, they execute much, much faster. So I don't think, though, that I was not able to find a particular about on here or system. Let's see if it has system information. It doesn't really give you that type of thing from the graphic environment like we did see in the GNOME execution. Windows are nice and square here. They don't have the rounded corners. Let's launch Firefox and see how long it takes here for this to boot up. I think that was about the same speed as we got on the GNOME environment. And let's pull something with graphics here. We'll click on one of these and see if we can get it to come up here. It's asking me all these questions. Not really a whole lot of graphics. Looks like this is mostly a sales, but it did take a little bit of time for that particular website to load. Very square windows, very small icons here. But again, it seems to be that the windows are snapping open and shut. When I clicked on the terminal there, it booted right up. So let's take a look at NeoFetch on this particular computer from comparison. We still see that we're running the EndeavourOS, same kernel. We're at the same resolution. It has basically the same number of packages, 839. I did the updates. But if you look down here at the bottom, the amount of memory it's using is only 520. This is compared to, if we looked at NeoFetch on GNOME, it was 904. If you recall, this is only 520 out of our 8 gigabytes of RAM. So it is running not quite half of the memory that we saw from GNOME. Let's clear that out. We're going to take a look at our system bench, and we're going to do CPU, and we're going to run it. And if you remember, this did in 10 seconds about 12,000 operations or events to the CPU. Let's see what we get from this particular one. Same, 12,481. So performance is about the same, and as I recall, the minimum and maximums here, the maximum is quicker. GNOME, it was 2 milliseconds something. The minimum was the same, 0.75. So very, very similar there. So let's clear this out. And if you remember, when we went to test the memory, system bench, memory, run. In 10 seconds in GNOME, we got 51 million on our active test here. And in 10 seconds here, we got 53,486,756. That is fairly significant. We're talking about 2 million more operations, events to the memory there. we still have, if you recall in GNOME, the minimum millisecond was 0, same as here, but the maximum was 0.75. This is 0.24. So we are running faster and we are doing more events. Let's take a look at our HTOP. And this is telling me that I'm running within 325 megabytes. Now again, when we run GNOME, remember that showed less than the NeoFetch did, but this is showing significantly less. This is showing that we're using almost a third of what GNOME was running. And if you remember, the average load time on GNOME was 0.45. This is, now we're showing 0.29. It was at 0.35. I mean, it's significantly faster load time for the different events and using much less memory. So definitely, this environment would be a solution if you're trying to run on older hardware, because it's going to make older hardware run faster. Let's see here. What do we have under System Tools here? This is a basic welcome screen. Let's see how fast that pops up. This can be used to manage all the different things on your computer, including all the updates, the mirrors, and all that kind of stuff. This will pop up on each one of these distributions. But that was a pretty quick execution of that. Let's look at the file manager. And again, that snapped right up. And you can see that it gives you a basic little file manager here. Square corners, no drop shadow. But again, we're moving at a much faster speed. So LXQt, which is developed in Qt, seems to be a reasonable solution for an older machine. Not quite as polished, but definitely a little bit faster. Finally, let's take a look at XFCE. This is my personal favorite among the lightweight environments. Very similar in its memory consumption and speed, but I think that it appears slightly more polished than the LXQt, but that's just a personal favorite. We're going to take a look at some of the same things that we looked at in the other environments. So if you look at XFCE from the get-go, you can see it kind of, again, is reminiscent of Windows. You have essentially a start button here at the bottom that launches a menu that is very familiar to anyone who's ever used any Microsoft program. And this, like all the other endeavors, it does not install an Office suite from the basic install. Let's see if we can find an About window. We can, in fact, find About. And it tells us that we're running Endeavour 64-bit on Arch Linux. We're running this XFCE 4.20 with the same Arch Linux we've run on the other two environments, and that we basically are doing all the same things as far as the other environments. But did you notice that if we click on any of these windows, like when I clicked on that About, the speed with which this executed, I think, is very fast. And you don't really have the rounded corners that you had in GNOME, but I think that the windows look more polished. Now, admittedly, it installs a dark theme by default, but the buttons at the top are a little bit more attractive. To my mind, it tells you as you go through each of these different screens that things just snap along very, very quickly. Let's open the file manager like we did in the previous versions again. Snaps right open. It gives you a full distribution of the different things that are available here. And if we want to look in the different file folders or anything, now this is a clean install, so there's nothing really in here. It gives you a lot of different flexibility to what you want to use. If we launch Firefox, again, when we did it on GNOME and LXQt, took a little bit of time, and you can see that it's doing the same here to bring Firefox up. And there, it did take quite a bit of time for that to come into view. But let's take a look here. What do we have? We try to pull something with a little bit of graphics image up here. And it does pull things up. Now, to me, it seemed like it brought that website up pretty darn quick. But the actual execution of the Firefox was a little bit slow. Slower than what I would have expected it to be. Let's go ahead and take a look at our terminal. That took a little bit less time than the LXQt, if you notice that. But it did open quickly, but not as fast as the other environment. Let's take a look at NeoFetch. All right, showing the same kernel that we've seen in the past. But here we're seeing 719 megabytes out of our 8 gigabytes. So substantially more than the LXQt. A lot more. Still 200 less than what NeoFetch showed for GNOME, but significantly more than the LXQt. So we are using more memory. I guess that's the price we're paying for the extra enhancements and aesthetics that we're getting here. Let's take a look at System Bench. If we try the CPU, and we're going to run it, remember both returned about 12,000 events on the other two environments. This should give us a 10-second result. And again, 12,000 events. This has got to be because I'm using the same kernel and polling the same number, same type of CPU. But take a look at the latency here. The maximum latency was 1 second. Remember on GNOME it was over 2. Minimum seems to be the same, hovering around a 0.75. So let's clear that out. We're going to take a look at the system benchmark for the memory. And we had 51 million events on GNOME and 53 million on LXQt. Let's take a look at what 10 seconds gives us to the memory here. 53 million. So closer to the LXQt lightweight environment. So these are executing faster. Again, minimum of 0, which each one has. But remember the maximum here of 0.4 on this particular environment. It was much higher than that. It was close to 2 milliseconds on GNOME. So these are executing things much clearer or much quicker. Let's take a look at HTOP. HTOP is reporting 535 megabytes. Consistent with what we've seen in the past, it's dropped a little bit from NeoFetch. Still much less than GNOME, but more than the LXQt. Remember, the LXQt was running in 300 megabytes. So LXQt seems to be the winner as far as minimum amount of memory and execution. Our average load time here, though, 0.25. This is really fast, even compared to the other lightweight environments. This is a really fast load time here under XFCE. For me, the XFCE, just aesthetically, what you get for lightweight, even though it's more than the LXQt, aesthetically, it's much more pleasant to look at, and the things that you can do are seem to be just as fast to me, but with a little bit more polish on them. So between the two of them, I would pick XFCE for a lightweight environment. If you're really going for aesthetics and you want something polished, you're going to go for something like GNOME or KDE. That's going to give you that polished professional feel, but they are going to be slower and they are going to be a bit of a memory hog. So let's go back and take a look at our slideshow for 1 second, where I've tried to make a chart comparing the different benchmarks that we've looked at. The last thing that I want to look at is I had compiled a series of benchmarks while my camera was not active and other things were not running on my primary computer when I compared these 3 different environments. And I wanted to go over, the results are very similar to what we saw in my demonstrations, but basically on GNOME, the CPU events were 13,000, and that seems to be the same across the board for GNOME, LXQt, and XFCE. Memory events, GNOME had 55,930,000. LXQt, we're seeing 56 million here, barely an increase, and XFCE was 56,400,000. A little bit more of events were processed under XFCE. The HTOP demonstrated megabytes of 672 for the GNOME, 400 for the LXQt, and XFCE was 515. The LXQt is demonstrating that it does run in the lowest amount of memory and is the least bit of a memory hog, most efficient. NeoFetch reported similar numbers for GNOME 687, LXQt 404, and XFCE 519. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that a lot of it comes down to personal preference. If you're running a 10-year-old computer, you're going to want something like LXQt to run in those minimal resources. If you want aesthetics and you've got plenty of RAM, you're going to want something like GNOME or KDE that's going to give you the full computer experience. But the closest thing that is a hybrid for lightweight with a good environment, I think, is XFCE. Now, that's a personal preference, but I think it gives you a lot of aesthetics and still runs extremely light. So if you found this video helpful at all, please hit the subscribe button and the like button down below. That helps me with YouTube. And I appreciate you stopping by at Bites Bread and Barbecue. See you later. Bye.